the tropics because we're getting closer and closer to the peak of hurricane season, and we are dealing with our strongest hurricane so far this season in the Atlantic Basin. It's Hurricane Erika. It is now a Category 3 on the Saffir-Simpson scale. That makes it a major hurricane with winds up to 115 miles an hour. Now, Erika is centered at 22.3 degrees north, 63.2 degrees west, and that makes it about 325 miles northeast of San Juan, Puerto Rico. Of course, this is Puerto Rico. It is moving north at 7 miles an hour. The pressure, 955 millibars. Now, you know this is Puerto Rico, and you see the lower 48 here, the East Coast, this being the Bahamas. This is Cuba. We have the U.S. and the British Virgin Islands here, and the islands that make up the Lesser Antilles. So then, if Hurricane Erika is moving north now, you know it's not moving in the general direction toward the lower 48, and we have had some indications that it might even be moving slightly east of due north, and that means it very well may start to begin its turn a little bit away from the U.S. Now, another thing, too, I want to point out is that its longitude here is 63.2 degrees west, and the longitude of Bermuda is about 64.7 degrees west. So this is the 65-degree west longitude line here. So let's see, Bermuda is right about here. So because it's already east of Bermuda and it's moving north and should eventually curve off to the east, then it should stay well east of Bermuda as well. So not only should it not affect the lower 48, but it should not even really affect Bermuda either, since it is moving off toward the north and then should curve off toward the east. You can clearly see our hurricane. It sticks out just like a sore thumb, and what's even more impressive is this very clearly identifiable eye, as this system has become quite symmetrical here. You can see the dense overcast clouds right around it. This is where we have the deepest convection right around the center of the storm. So yeah, this system has really increased overnight, and it's a fairly formidable hurricane now as it continues to churn the waters just north of Puerto Rico. Now, you know that a hurricane is a large and intense area of low pressure, so here too we have winds in a counterclockwise fashion. So we generally have a wind flow out of the north and west here across the northern shores of Puerto Rico. So we have had a few showers, and you can see how they're basically moving off from the northwest toward the southeast here, but they are mainly north of Puerto Rico as our hurricane continues to pull on away, and it is also over 300 miles to the north of it, or the center of the hurricane is. But nevertheless, hurricane or coastal flood warnings have been issued, and they are still effective for the northern shores of Puerto Rico, as we might find the seas and the swells and the water kind of piling up on the northern shores. And also coastal flood warnings have been issued for the U.S. Virgin Islands. Of course, we will keep you posted on the latest. Our Hurricane Erika, a Category 3 now on the Saffir-Simpson scale, right here across the central Atlantic and just north of Puerto Rico. We've been also watching this little tropical wave east of our hurricane. It should move into an environment that is more hostile and not necessarily favorable for development, so we're not too much concerned, of course, with this tropical wave, even though we have had quite a bit of flare-up with this system as it slowly moves off toward the west. So no general concerns with our tropical wave here. Let's go a little farther west. Of course, this being the Western Pacific, and Oliva here is a typhoon now, and it's moving off toward the west and should approach the northern.
Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
All right, it's time to update you on what's happening in the tropics, and it's the peak of the season now. And did you know that September the 10th is the historic peak of the hurricane season? And we have a powerful hurricane here today, 120 miles an hour, Category 3 on the Saffir-Simpson scale. This is a major hurricane, 115 miles an hour, the threshold. And look at the pressure. Hurricane hunters were investigating earlier, and they found the pressure just dropping like a rock last night. And the storm, well, it's moving north. And the storm moving north, we start to get a little nervous for our friends in Bermuda here. And here's a look at the storm. The forecast does take the track a little bit off towards the north-northeast with time, taking it safely to the east of Bermuda, but we could have another one of those brush-by deals like what we had around the Virgin Islands yesterday. So we're still not writing this one off entirely. Then we look to the west. Look what we have here. We'll talk more about this in a moment. First things first, look at this. This is quite a hurricane here. Very well organized, convection wrapped right around the center there. And look at the eye. This is one heck of a hurricane. And the good news is that it reorganized itself when it's away from the land areas. So around Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, you just had the brush-by effects. But with the storm spinning about here, quite an impressive display of surf and swells coming on into Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Satellite picture here is just awesome, isn't it? Look at that. You can see right down into the eye here. Look at that eye wall. That is a heck of a system, and there is potential for a little further strengthening as it moves its way slowly north over some very warm waters. What's left around Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands? You can see some of the departing bands of showers. Checking our Doppler radar estimates, did see about 7 to 8 inches of rain right around the British and U.S. Virgin Islands. Coastal flood warning still in effect here for the British and U.S. Virgin Islands and on the north coast of Puerto Rico. Those will probably be discontinued during the mid-afternoon hours, so there'll be some sort of a reconfiguration. Here's a look at the water vapor loop for you. And as we take a look at the water vapor loop, you can see our storm right here. Here is Bermuda. Here's the flow up out of the southwest. So the storm forecast moved north-northeast. You can see how close it will come, but we think, again, hopefully it'll stay far enough east so you guys will escape. Now over here in the Gulf of Mexico, look at this. You do see some turning here. An upper low, but it does appear it's trying to take on tropical characteristics. Hurricane center is latching onto it, and they think there's the possibility depression could form during the next 24 hours. So we'll get into that in more detail after we talk about this wave here coming off the African coast. And we talk about this area disturbed weather. That's really not doing too much. And as we head through the Caribbean, don't see anything going on. There goes Erika. Not much happening around Florida. But over here, right here, you can see the twisting there. That's where we are concerned about. Showers and thunderstorms.
8 feet are approaching the north coast of Puerto Rico. We've already had some higher surf smashing into the north coasts of the Virgin Islands, and we think that will continue through this afternoon into tonight and actually into tomorrow. One of the problems we might have is that at the time of high tide later tonight around midnight local time here in the Northern Islands, there could be additional overwash as the combination of the normal high tide with the effects from the swells coming in.
We have 15-foot swells on Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. We'll have the latest on the hurricane's development and where it's headed. Those stories plus in-depth forecasts and analysis on this edition of WeatherScope.
The Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
Well, it's time to take a look at our tropical update, and we have a strong Category 3. This is a hurricane which continues to intensify. 125-mile-an-hour sustained winds, gusts close to 150, north-northeast at 9 miles per hour. That's a bit of a change since earlier today when we had more of a northerly course, and the pressure did actually fall as low as 949 millibars before rising to the 951 that you see before you there as of late this afternoon. Latest position reports around 23.6 north, 62.4 west, and that would put it roughly 620 miles south-southeast of Bermuda. This is a system that we hope will be steered well to the east of Bermuda during the next 2 to 4 days. There are still advisories, although not a large area covered. Heavy surf advisory, north-facing coasts of Puerto Rico. There are some reports of 9-foot swells off the coast of Puerto Rico. As of mid-afternoon, the high tide cycle will roll back in again later this evening, and at that time there could be some additional problems with beach erosion. You do notice as you head east of the islands, the Virgin Islands, no advisories in effect here as we get into the Lesser Antilles, but notice the well-defined features on our hurricane. We have what we call the outflow of air aloft as traced out by the high cloud motion. We have closer towards the center, well, first the well-defined eye, the lack of significant cloud cover here, and then around the eye itself, an incredible amount of rising air motion. And remember, now at the low levels, we have the air flowing in towards that area of lowest pressure, and then anywhere from 10 to maybe 60 miles from the actual center of circulation, you'll see an abrupt change to a rapid spin up of the air, and then it flows out aloft, and that's what we're seeing here. So a classic hurricane from many regards. And even here on the northwestern fringe, the air flow still coming out in a circular pattern, indicating that we don't really have any negative effects from the trough to the north yet, but we do think that will happen as we head into tomorrow. That trough, as it shows up in the upper wind pattern this morning, is quite evident, sitting off the east coast of the U.S., but we still have the upper high over the hurricane itself, providing just one more ingredient in addition to the warm ocean waters to give us that continued intensification trend. But we do think, since the system has picked up some forward speed, that eventually, especially as we get into tomorrow, Tuesday, we should see a little bit of an increase in the forward speed, and hopefully we will also see a corresponding track more into a northeast instead of just north-northeast. Hopefully we will see northeast, and that should then start the process of getting this well east of Bermuda. But folks on the island of Bermuda certainly need to pay attention, since it is a strong Category 3 hurricane. It is to your south, and we know that the forecast tracks can have a certain margin of error in the extended time period. In fact, sometimes when you're talking 2 to 3 days, it can be incredibly significant. But we're working on that, and there have been some big improvements made over the last 10 years in particular, and things should improve. But the way the science exists right now, there's still that probability of big error in the long term. All right, now here's that wave east of the islands. There are the islands. You notice east of the islands, no convection at all. This system really has been torn apart. There are strong northerly winds coming all the way down south to about 10 degrees latitude. So this system, we think, will have an incredibly difficult time trying to gather any significant convection around its low-level center during the next 24 to 36 hours. An area of low pressure coming off the West African coast. There is, although you probably wouldn't suspect it, there's also an area of lower pressure here, but again, it's not very well organized, so we're not really too concerned about those systems at this point in time. We head farther to the west. You can see in the Caribbean here some high cirrus clouds coming up from the southwest. There's a weak upper low here, and then as we get into the Gulf, all the satellite pictures today, the visible view over the Gulf has shown an indication for some organization to an area of convection. Reconnaissance is scheduled to fly in tomorrow and check it out and give us additional information. The surface pressures have fallen somewhat in the past 24 hours, especially in the southwestern
Hurricane Erika. These are the data. As of 11 o'clock, 24.6 north, if you're keeping track, 61.6 west. That is the spot where the center of the eye of the hurricane has been located by the National Hurricane Center. They've had a research plane flying around this thing all night, and most recently they found the lowest barometric pressure yet in the development of this hurricane. 27.94 inches of mercury, or 946 millibars. That is a strong Category 3 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale that runs from 1 to 5. The Category 3 is considered a major hurricane. 125 mile per hour winds on this one. The movement, fortunately, away from the Caribbean islands, and that's good news. Nevertheless, the National Weather Service in San Juan has sought fit to still keep us in a heavy surf advisory. North-facing shores only. Same story for the U.S. and British Virgin Islands. There it is. You are looking down on this thing, the 35-mile wide eye of Hurricane Erika, and those coordinates centered right in the middle. Isn't that something? Still a very nice outflow, a very healthy hurricane we have here. Off in the southwest corner of your screen, those are Hispaniola and Puerto Rico, those islands. And fortunately, our hurricane is having no impact on you at all, except for some high surf here tonight. Here's the ridge of high pressure that's in part been built by our hurricane as all this warm air is forced up into the atmosphere that intensifies our ridge of high pressure, and tropical storms and hurricanes like ridges of high pressure. Of course, these things develop their own atmosphere, their own elements in the atmosphere to help keep them going. But I'll tell you, the further north this gets, and this north-northeast track is expected to continue for the next day or two, the deeper into these southwesterly winds aloft this will get. So there's going to be more wind shear and eventually some cold water. So from the top and below, our hurricane will be eaten away. And then by Wednesday, we should see a diminution of the winds around the eye of Hurricane Erika. Once again, good news for our friends here. Nobody took a direct hit from Hurricane Erika this year. Then we got, well, around that ridge of high pressure, strong northerly winds coming deep down toward the equator. And I believe that this little element right in here is an association with that upper level trough that extends all the way down way far to the south. Then a small ridge of high pressure out to the east of that, some lighter winds aloft. And this tropical wave is moving into